We had it set for number 5. You know, we went through Hitler's plans before World War II. So now we did the first 4. We kind of talked about those, and now we're going to spend pretty much all of today looking at his final solution, and that's what today's lesson's about. So it's the same focus question. We're looking at Hitler's rise to power and, you know, what he does when he gets that power. All right. I cautioned everyone to kind of let you know that this is a pretty sad lesson. We have a couple sad lessons in World War II. This is definitely one of those. I think I'm going to show you some things that may surprise you or shock you if you're unaware what the Holocaust is. But I think that's good for you guys to see, so you kind of understand how things like this can happen. All right, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that these things did happen, and we have to prevent it from ever happening again, so to speak. All right, so I'll give you another minute. Copy down everything on this slide. The red, the blue, the orange, because this is the only slide for today. And I want you guys to get a good sense of what the final solution was. Okay, so let's go over just a couple details from yesterday. We should know that one of Hitler's main points and one of Germany's main points was that he didn't want a diverse culture in Germany. He didn't want a diverse group of people. He wanted pretty much one race, which he considered the Aryan race, you know, pretty much who was someone who's blonde hair, blue eyes, or a white person, or pretty much anyone who was white, who was, you know, what he considered normal in his eyes. He wasn't really too bothered by it. If you weren't a part of that race, you were seen as an inferior race. So if you were Middle Eastern, if you were Hispanic, if you were black, you were seen as an inferior race. So he basically leveled people based off of how they looked and what their race was, and, you know, deemed if you were a better person or a worse person, not based on their life that they lived, but based on how they looked. You know, we hopefully in America don't do that, you know, here. I can't say not everyone is perfect in America, but our foundational society is based on, you know, all men are created equal. So, you know, it doesn't matter what race you are, what gender you are, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. No race is better than anyone else. But in Germany, that's not how it was. All right. The group that he deemed to be the lowest race we talked about were the Jewish people. The Jewish people, it's a little confusing. It's a religion, but now also there is the state of Israel. So there's people in Israel who are also Jewish, but we're going to look at it from just is a form of religion at this point. And he wanted to rid the Jewish people out of Germany. He basically blamed them for all of Germany's problems. And his basic notion was that they were the root of why Germany was struggling. And, you know, it wasn't just Jewish people. He did go after, you know, people that were openly gay, people with disabilities, black people, you know, people that weren't, you know, part of the Aryan race. But ultimately, he specifically first goes after the Jewish people and targets them. So depending on where you are in Europe, there's going to be factions of, you know, Jewish people, just like in the United States, you have, you know, different groups of people living here, you know, that practice different religions. So he came up with this idea of the final solution, which eventually led to the very famous Holocaust. And the final solution was his systematic extermination of all Jewish people in the world. Guys, do you guys know what the profession of an exterminator does in the world? What does an exterminator do? You have to hire an exterminator. What are you hiring them for? Okay, good. To get rid of insects, okay, usually bugs, okay? So that's what an exterminator does, okay? So when you are exterminating the Jewish people, he wants to kill or get rid of the Jewish people. Now, even Hitler himself wouldn't come out and say that right away. you'll see he worked in phases to eventually get to this final solution. You know, even Hitler, if he came out and said, you know, he wants to kill all Jewish people, that would come off way too strong. That's not the way you act as a politician. Politicians and people in government are a lot more tactical than you think. All right, so he's going to start off in phases to eventually first just take away some rights from the Jewish people and then eventually lead to this extermination where he's going to kill all of the Jewish people. And he wants to get rid of the Jewish people in the world. But let me go back to something. Understand in World War II, and you'll learn more about this on Monday, he wanted Lebensraum, number 2 here. So he took over countries that bordered Germany. Every time he took over a country like Austria or Czechoslovakia, he would take the Jews from that particular area and round them up and put them into what's called these concentration camps, which you guys are going to be pretty familiar with soon. All right. When you do this, when you intentionally kill off a group of people based off of religion, based off of you know, how they look, their culture, their race, that is known as a genocide. Okay. Now, unfortunately, history around the world, and I got to say, the United States has never really been part of a genocide, but around the world, there's been a lot of genocides. The Holocaust is pretty much the most famous, at least in the last 150 years. At the end of the lesson, if we have some time, I'll try and just mention some other genocides. But what the Holocaust was the vocabulary word of a genocide. When you get to 10th grade, you will learn a lot more about this. This is a huge focus when you get to 10th grade world history. Okay? So what happens is, before it becomes a genocide, there's steps to it eventually becoming a genocide. And this was kind of open to a lot of the German people. A lot of the German people started to see what was happening to the Jewish people. Not necessarily that they were being killed, okay? Will the killing of Native Americans count when colonists first came and spread disease? You know, Maheen, I think that's an argument you can make. I don't think genocide is usually more intentional. You know, if there's a plague or a pandemic or a disease that gets out and it spreads disease and it kills off, Native Americans, or likewise, when a lot of the white settlers got here, a lot of them died from new sicknesses. So that's an interesting question and never been asked. And I think you can make that argument. I'm not sure if there's a correct answer to that response. But usually genocides, I would just say, are intentional. If they intentionally brought disease over to intentionally kill the Native Americans, then I think for sure it is. But I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just the course of nature. You know what I mean? It didn't seem to be an intentional thing. That's a really good question, though. All right, it's when it's intentional is when it's a genocide. If there's a mistake that happens that kills off people, that's an unfortunate tragedy, but that's not always a genocide. All right. So with that being said, a lot of the German people really started to see what was happening when you see some of the first phases of the final solution, but no one really could speak out against this. And this is a constant theme. Hopefully you're realizing it's a fascist country. You speak out against Hitler, it's illegal. You're going to be thrown in jail. You're going to be killed. Your family's going to be thrown in jail. Now, I'm sure there are topics you're very passionate about right now as, even 8th graders in American society. And one of the beauties of our country is that you could speak out against that and truly go through that. I'll talk about that a little later, Milagros. All right. So what I want you to think about is, yes, there's stuff you're very passionate about. It's good to speak up against that and to research it and to, if you disagree with the government, to say that or write about it. But I really want you to think for a second. There's no risk for you really speaking out against the government, so it's easy to do. There's no risk for you to go out and protest whatever is upsetting you, right? But think about for a second, would you be willing to protest? Would you be willing to speak out if that meant that you're going to possibly be thrown in jail or killed for speaking out against the government? Some still will, but I think many people won't. All right, so the government in a fascist country with their very strong military intimidates people to kind of go along to get along. All right, so in this country, yeah, it's good to speak out against injustice. It's good to speak out against things that you disagree with the government's doing or whatever, system is doing wrong. But if you did this in a fascist country, this could very well lead to your death, and yes, sometimes lead to your family being put into trouble too. There are certain there's certain governments like the fascist government or like the Soviet Union we'll eventually learn about, where they took out the families as well or jailed the families as well because they were deemed to be a disgrace to the country, and they didn't want anyone in that bloodline to be a part of that. So that's just like something that could happen as well. So that's why I mentioned the family too. All right, so this whole final solution idea, comes in waves, as you're about to see, but ultimately the people of Germany don't speak out against it out of fear, and that's the true thing. So North Korea is kind of confusing. They're technically a socialist communist country, but they rule similar to a fascist country, meaning they have authoritative dictator. You're not allowed to go against the dictator. Like I said, in terms of government control, communism and fascism are similar. Not in terms of their economic policy and the way they try and work with their citizens, but in terms of government control, they are a very strong government type. All right, so North Korea is more communist than fascist technically. All right, what we're going to do now is I'm going to do this reading alongside with you. So if you can, please go to your Google Classroom. Let's get a better sense of what's going on here with the Holocaust. So we'll do this reading together. I'm going to take my time to go through it, and you're going to see how it's built up in waves. Okay? So we'll look at the final solution in phase 1. The final solution referred to the extermination of the Jews, or Hitler's final solution to the Jewish problem. Hitler implemented this solution in phases or stages. So when he was first put in as dictator in 1933 from the Enabling Act, this was the first phase of his final solution. Between April and October of 1933, laws were enacted to prevent anyone of Jewish descent from holding the positions in the civil service, the legal profession, the teaching profession, the medical profession, and in the press. Basically, Jews were eliminated from the most visible positions of power. So if you were Jewish, you could not be a teacher. You couldn't be someone who worked in the press. You couldn't be a doctor. You couldn't be someone who worked in the German government. Okay? You were not allowed to. Okay? The laws also began to restrict Jews from attending German high schools and universities. So Jewish people couldn't go to college starting in 1933. So think about that. Think about if we were to say, no people from Yemen are allowed to go to college. If you're from Yemen, you're not allowed to go to college. Picture saying no people from Mexico are allowed to be teachers, right? Think about the outrage that would ensue in our country. And of course, that is a righteous thing to protest. They're allowed to get education up until usually high school or college after phase 1. So they can go to elementary school, they can go to middle school, but after that, they weren't allowed to go to what we call higher education. All right? Phase 2. At first, German people were outraged, but they really can't say much about it. But as time went by and nothing worse seemed to happen, they deluded themselves into believing that perhaps the worst was over. Then in March 1935, the boycotts of Jewish businesses began again, and by September, the Nuremberg laws were passed. And these laws did these 2 things. Number 1, deny Jews the right to German citizenship. Number 2, forbid marriage between the Germans and the Jews. The only time this has ever happened in the United States where you couldn't be a citizen or you couldn't marry a particular person is prior to 1870 with African Americans in slavery. Okay? And even some African Americans were allowed to marry other, let's say white people, but this is the only time that it happened in American society, and that's in 1870. This is in 1935, okay, and Jewish people were not allowed to be citizens of Germany, and they were not allowed to marry a German person. After the implementation of the anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish laws, Semitic's another word for Jewish, Hitler began to tone it down. The world was coming to visit Germany in the summer of 1936. Berlin was hosting the Olympics. All right, so I always take my time to mention there's a movie that came out a couple of years ago called Race. Let me know if you've ever heard of it. I'll put up a photo here. Let me see. Put up a photo of it here. It's about Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics that took place in Berlin. My internet's so slow today. I don't know if I'll be able to pull it up. I don't know what's going on the internet here. But ultimately, it's a great, great movie about an Olympic runner named Jesse Owens from the United States who happened to be black. And he went to Nazi Germany, and not to ruin the story, but eventually won the gold medal. Oh boy. You guys hear me back?
No, we can hear you.
Hello, hello? Okay. It said I just lost I lost my connection. So anyway, I'm sorry. So there was this movie that came out about Jesse Owens going to Nazi Germany, all right, and basically winning a gold medal. And if you understand how Hitler felt about, you know, races that weren't a part of the Aryan race, and a black person walked into Nazi Germany and won the gold medal, it was a very great moment, you know, for America. And it's this movie here. I'll just share the tab here. Okay, this 2016 film, okay, with Jesse Owens. If you have some time over the next couple of weeks, you want to watch it, I think it's a great, great movie to kind of give you a sense of what's going on at this time. All right, let's go to phase 3. Now, phase 3 is where things start to get a little bit dicey and things get a little bit violent. All right, after the low created by the Olympics, this phase was marked by an increase in violence. In May of 1938, thousands of Jews were arrested and sent temporarily to concentration camps. Okay, now concentration camps are basically like prison camps, but instead of living in a jail cell, you live in a camp where you work. And the idea of a concentration camp is basically to work people so they can eventually become. Why it's said temporarily is it's not really temporary. Okay, it lasted a long, long time. All right, so people thought that the Jews were sent temporarily, but it wasn't. By July 1938, Jews were required to carry a special identification card. This made it easier for the police to control the Jews. And then eventually, this led to November 9th and 10th, which is known as Kristallnacht. Okay, this is the night of broken glass, or known as Crystal Night. So basically, if you were a Jewish business, if you had a Jewish home, the German police, the German military, the German people went around and basically broke the glass or broke the windows or damaged your business or home. This is a way to intimidate Jewish people to basically, you know, not have a business in Germany. Okay? By November 28th, 1938, Jews were barred from attending public schools, couldn't go to school. They were excluded from public places. You couldn't go to a ball game, you couldn't go to the park, you couldn't go to the beach. And they had curfews, meaning they couldn't be out past 8 p.m. All right. Phase 4 is where the concentration camps or death camps are put into place. And it's amazing how much horrific things they could write in such a small little paragraph here. Okay, but we're going to read through it. All right. So you have what's known as the death camps. So pretty much every place that Germany took over in World War II, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, they would put those concentration camps or death camps there. And the death camps were placed in those countries to keep them out of the eyes of German people. Some of the most infamous or famous for a bad reason, some of those infamous camps were Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Belzec. Jews were shipped by railway from their homes to the camps. So first and foremost, you had to get the Jewish people out of their homes. Now, the Jewish people were often segregated, very similar to what you'd have in the United States between whites and blacks. Jewish people were segregated from other Germans, so they're very easy to find. So once Hitler and everyone deemed this was time to send them to the death camps, they would send the military over to the Jewish ghettos, they were called, and they'd force them to go on a train. If they refused, they were killed. Okay, right on the spot. So everyone kind of just followed along because they didn't want to be killed, and they were forced onto the trains. Once at the camp, if they survived the train trip, Jews were herded in a long line towards the director. So this is extremely crazy. Okay. Once you got to the concentration camp, you walk towards the director. So let's say you're walking towards me and I'm the director. What I do really quick is I evaluate you in two or 3 seconds, and I point you either to the right or to the left. Okay. If I point you to the right and you look maybe a little bit old, or you look a little bit like someone that can cause a problem, or you have a disability, I point you to the right. Okay. Those people that I'm pointing to the right are going to be selected for death immediately. So what's going to happen is they were selected for work or death. Those selected for death were sent to the showers, okay? And these showers looked like regular showers where you would go like wash off, but instead of water coming out, there would be this Zyklon B gas, and that gas would instantly kill, all right, the people that were there. Okay, the people that were killed, these Jewish people, the bodies of those people were eventually cremated in these large ovens. Okay, and their bodies were completely gotten rid of. It's like they didn't even exist. Okay, just before a director looking at you. So those are the people he pushed off to the right. The other people he pushed off to the left, this is going to be one of the sickest things you'll ever hear me say. The people that were immediately sentenced to death on the right were probably the lucky ones. Because what the people on the left were about to go through in these concentration camps almost seemed like torture, that the end goal ended up being them dying. It was like a horrible, horrible thing. So here's what ended up happening. Okay, the first thing is when they get pushed off to the left, they get their head shaved immediately. They're going to get a number tattoo on their arm, and that's how they're going to be identified. You are not allowed to call any of them by their real names. Okay, so if my real name was Anthony, but I was in a concentration camp and I was Jewish, you are not allowed to call them by that name. Okay, they need to be identified by that 6-digit number on their arm. Okay, and they were given a uniform. Okay, a striped pajama-looking uniform. So if you know the movie, that's where they get it from. They were completely dehumanized, forced to do extremely hard labor, and given very little to eat. Like so little to eat that you can't believe how skinny some of these people were. Many of them died working. If they disobeyed any orders, they were usually shot and killed on the spot. Okay, and this led to the death of 6 million people. Which I don't care how popular you become in your life, guys, you will never meet 6 million people. Yet 6 million people were killed simply because a fascist dictator did not like them. And to be honest, guys, we don't have a great reason why. We'll talk about soon why he didn't really like them. We don't know. But he deemed them to be the weakest race, and he wanted to get rid of them. And since he had the power to do it, and he was in a country where you're not allowed to speak up against it and didn't have checks and balances, and like again, America is not a perfect country. But we have systems in our government where you can speak out. You have systems in our government where there's checks and balances where we can prevent things like this from happening. Okay? 6 million died, which makes it probably one of the deadliest events in world history. And this was all around World War II. There's also the war that's being fought. So the numbers of people that die in this war are absolutely insane. It's even way more than 6 million. All right? It's just a complete tragedy from top to bottom. And hopefully you guys realize, why it's important to be in a society with freedoms where people can, speak out against things with checks and balances, with separation of powers, because one bad leader in a fascist country could lead to an event like this. Okay, and that's really, really scary. Do you know how many survived? I don't know. That's a great question. I'm sure you could look up. I'm fairly certain a lot more died than survived. So if there were 6 million that died, there's probably only 1 million or 2 that survived, if I had to guess. Correct, Mia. Yep, that is a great movie to watch if you have time. If you have race, you have this Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That's a great book, great movie, especially for kids to kind of see the Holocaust. So it's a really, good thing to kind of look at. All right. So I'm going to show you 36 Holocaust images you have to see before you die. This is me pushing the boundaries of 8th grade a little bit. You're going to see some very tough photos here. I'm just giving you a little bit of a trigger warning because the Holocaust is a horrible, horrible thing. And I think you have to, I don't think the reading does it justice sometimes. As bad as the reading is, I think you kind of need to see some of these photos to really understand, how horrific it really was. So this is going to be sad. We'll get through it. It's about 6 minutes long. Some of the images are fine. They're just photos of certain people. Some of them are extremely sad. So we're going to play this. All right. I'll speak over the photos as it's playing. And you get a better sense of what the Holocaust looked like. So this is one of the leaders of the Holocaust, Alfred Krupp, bad guy, but nothing too crazy that you're seeing here. All right, this is at the end of World War II, at the end of Auschwitz, at the end of the concentration camp. These are all the caskets that were being brought out. Look how many people that were killed. When a body was cremated, they took off their clothes, they took off their shoes, they took off their jewelry, and they basically threw them into the storage unit. Okay, imagine, okay, one piece of clothing consists of one person. Okay, and obviously you see all of the clothes that they have here. Auschwitz, their sign at the front entrance said, work makes one free, which is a lie. Okay, that's your really first tough photo there, guys. That's a mass grave of a lot of Jewish people that were killed. Okay, woman underdressed, about to be shot and killed. There's already someone shot and killed there on the ground, if you notice. These are the ovens where they cremated the bodies, so the bodies were no more. The ashes were just gotten rid of. Okay, had some valuables there. These were, you know, Nazis, people in Germany. This is just a weird thing. Even myself, I don't fully understand this. The Germans were very big in what's known as sterilization. They were trying to fix people that had disabilities. So they tried performing these medical experiments on them. Some of these things led to like shrunken heads. Some of these things had like some weird things go on. They were trying to basically fix a person who had a disability. And this led to some really weird things. German civilians being forced to see what their government did at the end of World War II. Many did not know how bad it was. We have to defend them a little. I'm going to let this one stick for a little. When I meant they were underfed, they were severely underfed. This gentleman here at the bottom of the screen, the very skinny legs, he has practically no stomach. He's practically just skin and bones. This is how a lot of them look towards the end of the concentration camp. Okay, there's no nutrition that was given to them. Okay, and they had to work out in the fields, okay, which is crazy. These are the people that were sent to the right. Okay, I don't know if it's a tourist attraction, but you could definitely go see it, Abigail. Those are babies. I have a 2-month-old. I don't like seeing that photo. Right, but obviously they were killed too. This was another way to mass exterminate. They would sometimes just line the Jewish people up naked, shoot them in the back of the head. Okay, 1 or 2 people killed all those guys. This is another type of way. That's a very famous photo. Okay, a guy about to be shot into his mass grave. And then this is them digging their own graves before they're killed, which is, you know, so inhumane, I can't even begin to tell you. They usually worked out in the fields, the quarries where the rocks were, and this is very typical, just doing mindless work, nothing like important. Okay, just doing jobs. Joseph Goebbels, you'll learn what propaganda is, but it's very big in World War II about basically trying to get people all on the same page. His job, Joseph Goebbels, is called the Minister of Propaganda. He's meant to run the media of Germany. So his job is to basically make Hitler look like a god and make Germany look to be the strongest country ever. That's his job. And people obviously bought into that. And, you know, this kind of goes to show you how influential the media is when it comes to things, even in Nazi Germany. This guy's in charge of the Holocaust, or the final solution. Right, victims go in all ages, old, young. Okay, if you were Jewish, it didn't really matter. Now, this is a horrible picture in itself, but this is an even more horrible. Yes, Mia, true. This is even more horrible if you know the backstory of the photo. So towards the end of World War II, now, Germany loses World War II. You know how I know Germany, you would know Germany loses World War II, is we're not speaking German right now. All right, so if you didn't know Germany loses World War II, there's a little bit of spoiler alert, they do, because we're not German, okay? This is a tremendously sad picture because what happens is, this is Dwight D. Eisenhower, he's the general of the United States. At the end of World War II, at Auschwitz, all of the German soldiers ended up shooting and killing all of the people that survived to the end of the war. And they killed them in the last moments. So the story behind this photo is, this is the United States military arriving about 2 hours too late. All these people were just killed because Germany had lost the war and they just wiped these people out as like a final screw you, so to speak. That's a very sad photo. So those people made it the entire way pretty much, and then at the very end they were killed. Mussolini and Hitler, fascist dictators. All right, so this is the deportation. This is when they're leaving like the Jewish ghettos and going out to the concentration camps. Sometimes they were forced to just leave their stuff, or weren't allowed to take things onto the train. No sense. They're not allowed to be used any of it. People that disagreed or did not want to go on the train or fought back a little were killed. These are people that tried to have an uprising in Litus, and they were killed. I hate this photo so much because these are kids about to go on to the concentration camp, about to go on the train. Like this kid here, he's smiling. I don't think he realizes, they're young and naive. They don't realize what's about to happen to them. It's extremely sad. Right, this was a big intimidation thing. You kill a couple of Jewish people, you hang them, and this way you put them as like intimidation for people so they get on the train. Right, the Zyklon B gas that was used in the showers. A little bit more of a close-up photo here. A very deadly gas. And I got plenty of it. Another thing where they, the shoes, okay, they took off their shoes, they would just leave them in a warehouse. Jewish people, go to synagogues for church, so they would sometimes put them in a synagogue and try and burn them alive, lock the doors. Yep. Gold jewelry. Okay, I'm wearing my wedding ring. Okay, one piece of jewelry consists of one person, you would think. Boy in the striped pajamas, that's where they get this from. Okay, that's exactly how they're dressed. And these striped looking, everyone looks the same, no identity. All right, mass murder in the Ukraine. Yeah, so there's really no other photos. Just a couple more pictures of some, famous Nazi people. But ultimately, you can kind of see the photos and how horrific it was. Now, I usually take this time. It's gonna be horrible. I'm gonna try and just rush through the next couple of slides. There's nothing to copy down. Before you guys get to your assignment, I think it's important to kind of just mention a few things. So in short, the historians do not have one specific reason why Hitler targeted the Jewish people. I've done my research. Historians have done research. There's no 100% answer. He never really specified, to be honest. He kind of just used them as a scapegoat for all of Germany's problems. The people of Germany need someone to blame their problems on, and they were the ones to blame. Okay? There's also a pretty mean, discriminatory stereotype about Jewish people. Jewish people stereotypically do well in society, no matter where they live. They usually have very high-paying jobs. They're, professions like lawyers, doctors, okay, things along those lines. So since a lot of Jewish people tend to do well in society, many people believe that they are a part of this world dominance thing where they want to dominate the world. And Hitler believed and bought into this, and he thought the Jews were intentionally trying to keep Germany weak. Yeah, Muiz, he thinks nothing of races that he deems inferior. Okay, there's no diversity. And we know he thought the Jewish race was the worst race in the world. So he wanted to start with them by exterminating them. Now, I don't know. Let's say Hitler was to win World War II. Does he go on to other groups that aren't part of the Aryan race? Does he go to Hispanic people? Does he go to Middle Eastern people? Does he go to black people? I don't know. Right? It's certainly possible, but he blamed the Jewish people first, so he went after them first. Okay? Now, again, not something to write down. I just want to mention we've had about 4 or 5 other genocides since the Holocaust. Now, generally speaking, they're happening in parts of the world where there's a little bit more poverty. There's something known as the Cambodian genocide. This is probably the worst one since the Holocaust. This is about the Khmer Rouge out in Cambodia, out in East Asia. There was a genocide against 2 million Cambodians, basically people that went against this guy, Pol Pot. So if you want to look at that, that's another genocide that's happened. Yeah, I don't even want to think about it too, Aura. The Rwandan genocide, this genocide of the Tutsis in 1994, this isn't too long ago. So in Rwanda, which is a country out in Africa, there was a civil war that eventually led to a genocide between two groups of people. You have the Hutus and the Tutsis. Honestly, think of it like Republicans and Democrats. You know, two groups of people that think a little bit differently. And they had a civil war, and that eventually led to a genocide in Rwanda. There's a movie that came out a couple of years, probably over a decade ago now, called Hotel Rwanda that shows the horrors of this. Okay, hundreds of thousands of people were killed in this. Okay, there's a Darfur genocide. Right when I was your age, a little bit around the time of 2003, there was a genocide out in Darfur, which is around Sudan. Okay, there's these Darfuris out in Western Sudan that really they're forced to move. It's like the Trail of Tears, but in that forceful removal, there's been a lot of death that have gone on, and this is another one of those there. I should also mention, because I know I have some Albanian students here, there's sometimes the Serbia, Albania, Kosovo conflict kind of gets looked at as a genocide. It's right on the cusp of possibly being one. And we'll talk about that more in our class when we get to the end of the year, but that's also one that some people consider. And yes, Rena, that's what I'm going to talk about now. This is possibly a genocide in the making, okay? We have the Zhejiang internment camps of the Uyghur people in China, okay? Now, this is the tricky thing. China is not a fascist country. They're more of a socialist communist country. They're very complicated, their government. It's very tough for me to even explain it. But ultimately, you need to know they have a very authoritative government, okay? And yes, Neve, I tend to agree. The news is not talking about this enough, and I think here's the reason why. China's press is run by the government. So the Chinese press is kind of able to hide this a little bit. So we really don't fully know what's going on, okay? They're able to hide it kind of well. We do know, and they have admitted, that there are people in what's known as re-education camps. Basically, there's this Muslim group of people in China called the Uyghur people. These Uyghur people were first, it started very small. They were just surveilled. They were kept an eye on. Now they're sent to camps to re-educate how they look at life, how they look at society, their religion. And if you see a photo of them on the bottom left, which is a real photo, you can kind of see how it looks like that kind of concentration camp feel. Here's the thing. We can't confirm at this point, okay? We can't confirm at this point if anyone's been killed. I'm sure there have been some, but we don't know at this point. All right, so this is something in terms of what's going on in the world right now you should be keeping a close eye on. Now, could we speak out against it? Sure, in the United States? Sure, we can. What's tricky about some genocides, though, if it's not your country, okay, can you change it in another country? The short answer is you can, but you need to maybe go to war. You maybe need to have economic sanctions. It's not easy to do. And for those that don't know, China looks like they have a very powerful military. Okay, so standing up to China because of what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslim people is a complicated issue. All right, they don't have a Ramadan this year. That's right, Rena. Okay, I failed to mention that. Okay, they basically are trying to become, quote unquote, more part of the Chinese culture. All right, so they don't want them thinking as Muslims. They want them to be thinking in a different way. All right, so this is what's going on in China now, and I would tend to agree with you guys. The media is not talking about this enough, but this is something you guys can do your research on and kind of go about it from your perspective. All right, so before I let you guys work on the assignment for homework, which is just the questions that go along, we have 5 minutes left here. If there's anything you'd like to say or discuss or point out or have a little discussion with, I'm going to open the floor to you guys. This is a pretty tough topic. So if there's things you want to say, there's things you feel you want to mention, or you have a question, now's the time to do it. Okay, if you don't, all right, then you can start working on that assignment to 11:07. But this is your time if you'd like to discuss anything that we learned here. And if there's nothing, there's nothing. That's no problem. Yeah, all right. And here's the thing. I'm showing it from an eighth grader perspective. Like when you really dive into it, it's even worse. When I go to Washington, D.C., I go to the Holocaust Museum. It's always 10 times worse than I even imagined. So it's even worse than I'm probably showing you, but yes. Yeah, Abigail, it does feel surreal. But no, it's definitely a thing. When you don't agree with a group of people or you deem them to be inferior to you, you mistreat them, right? It's just the nature of things. Even in America with slavery, right? We deemed the black person to be inferior to the white person. Now we have corrected that mistake, which is a good thing, which is a great thing, but they weren't deemed to be equal. It's the nature of history. It's gone on for hundreds of thousands of years, okay, with different groups of people. If people in power, if those people in power are not, doing the right thing, they could take advantage of inferior races and cultures and groups like you saw in Nazi Germany, like you're seeing now out in China. The Uyghur Muslims there's, close to 1 million Uyghur Muslims, but there's close to 1 billion people in China. So they're a very small minority of people in China. Okay, so Lena, the ban of the veil. Are you all right? Just explain a little bit more what you mean by the ban of the veil, because I have two thoughts of what that is. Are you talking about the hijab at this point? How they're not allowed to wear this? I think France has banned the veil, right? Gotcha. Okay. So is it genocide? No. Is it a bad thing where rights are taken away? Sure. That's something maybe to kind of keep an eye on too, right? You don't want the next step to be, certain Muslim people in France not allowed to do certain things. Okay, not allowed to do certain things. Right now, it's a ban. It's a controversial ban. I don't really know the law too well in France why they ended up doing that. I think it had to do with just being able to identify women in certain areas, but I don't know the reasons for it. Okay, so Lena, I'm actually not aware of all that stuff. I knew that they had the veil ban, but I didn't know about all that other stuff. And France is a pretty progressive country. I'm actually very surprised about that. Yeah, so we got to keep an eye on that, right? So right now it's a small step. Will it lead to outright genocide? No, but there's going to be times in present day and in history where rights are taken away, and this seems to be one of those times. Okay, your rights are not always absolute. We've learned that in this class, so that might be one of those things. All right. Any other last thoughts before we wrap it up, and we'll get into how World War II really starts on Monday. But is there any final thoughts you guys have? This is a big boy and big girl topic. Okay, this is not something I like doing with immature classes, and you guys are a mature class, so I have no problem doing it with you guys. All right. Well, this was a very sad lesson, but I hope you guys have a good weekend. I hope you guys have a positive weekend, and email me if you guys have any further questions on this. All right, bye-bye, guys.